So, just a little bit more about framing factors. You will hear us a lot discuss how we should be reframing from position to needs and helping to build that golden bridge, generate alternatives. So, reframing is something that is essential and critical to really coming to a close as we look at negotiations. So, I just kind of wanted to introduce it now and really kind of talk about the difference between framing, which we've discussed in great detail, and now looking kind of at reframing to kind of allow you to understand the difference between the two and what is reframing trying to accomplish. So, with reframing, within processes of reconciliation, negotiation, or joint problem solving, the explicit management of frames and the framing processes may lead to important shifts in both the frames themselves and in their impact on the conflict dynamics. This purposive management of frames is called reframing. Use of frame analysis and the reframing processes have the following goals: to clarify or refresh the perception of the issue and dispute in order to promote a more productive information exchange and listening to ideas not previously considered, and to expand the framework or discussion and explore means of action or solutions not yet attempted. Another is to sharpen the parties' understanding of their interests and how the modes of action they have chosen serve those interests, in order to examine potential processes for managing conflict more productively and to reconsider patterns of relationships among stakeholders. Next, to identify those subjects with the involved parties view differently, even when the biases of the divergent frames are more fully understood, in order to identify opportunities for trade offs based on clearly understood differences. And lastly, to identify differences which cannot be bridged in order to more fully appreciate conflict dynamics and to evaluate the potential for conflict reduction processes that do not violate these intractable differences, to undermine the degree of importance attributed to these intractable differences in frames, and to seek ways to address them. Thus, reframing, stemming from stakeholders' understanding of their own as well as others' expressed frames, may pave ways for resolving or at least better managing a dispute. The figure shown illustrates the roles frames and framing play in the dynamics of conflict development. It demonstrates how a frame change, or reframing in this case, may cause a shift in conflict development towards conflict management and or resolution. Types of frame categories are numerous and coined differently by researchers in various fields. The categories cited in this diagram are substance, reframing that affects how one views the world today or potential future states of the world. Process, reframing that affects how one interacts with others in a dispute. Values, reframing that allows parties to clarify the relationship between values and interests for both themselves and for other parties. And phrasing, the language used by disputants to communicate with one another. Frame analysis can be used by third-party interveners and by individual stakeholders and conveners to better understand conflict dynamics. Frame analysis has been used both retrospectively to understand past conflicts and prospectively as a tool for better managing an existing conflict. Retrospectively, it seeks to better understand conflict dynamics in order to glean lessons for the future. Prospectively, it advances consensus building and building the conflict assessments and intervention stages. Analytic techniques for frame analysis include interviewing the various stakeholders to ascertain their perceptions and interpretations, feeding back to the parties the resulting analysis, and then exploring with the parties the meaning and impact of these frames on the conflict dynamics. Particularly within the framework of conflict assessments, frame analysis and the resulting understanding of frames can help the stakeholders to better grasp the conflict, including the factors and contexts that can lead to change within a frame or changes to the frame themselves. In this sense, framing becomes a formative analytic technique. In intractable conflicts, frames are often quite stable over time, even when specific individuals move in and out of the conflict. The stability comes because various frames held by an individual tend to be self-reinforcing, and because frames are often shared within a community and therefore are socially reinforced through storytelling and shared perspectives. Yet research into intractable conflicts suggests that in at least some conflicts, frames can be altered over time through intentional interventions, and that the shift in frames helps to render disputes more tractable. At the same time, research shows that reframing is often not easy for parties. It requires taking on new perspectives and often requires some degree of risk taking on the part of the parties themselves. As such, reframing works best when changes in the context of the dispute can be made, such that incentives to consider new perspectives increase, or in the context of careful and constructive dialogue, with a strong focus on improving communication and building trust. A number of strategies and techniques exist in the use of dialogue to reframe intractable conflicts. These include reducing tension and promoting the de escalation of hostility. By using techniques such as listening, study circles, and some forms of mediation, which seeks to reduce tension by creating forums that promote more effective communication around a set of limited objectives. The forums focus explicitly on improving communication and reducing escalatory cycles that are often associated with mutually incompatible frames. Perspective taking. Techniques such as acknowledging critical identities, imaging of identities and characterizations, narrative forums, and listening circles allow disputants to understand the conflict and its dynamics from the perspective of other disputants. These approaches are particularly geared towards better understanding of identity and characterization frames in order to see oneself more objectively and the other party in a more positive light. They seek to enable disputants to see the potential validity and credibility of other perspectives and to examine the interplay between one's own frames and those of the other disputants. Establishing a common ground as a basis for agreement. By using techniques such as visioning exercises and common ground search processes, which enable reframing around a smaller set of issues. Common ground processes are used in highly divisive issues such as abortion and ethnic disputes, and seek to explore areas of agreement and possible joint action between parties who normally focus on their differences in order to open up communication between the parties. Search processes seek to identify desired futures in order to shift the focus from a short-term perspective to a long-term one. Enhancing the desirability of options and alternatives. Several approaches exist that may enhance the desirability of alternative options when presented to parties with divergent frames. For a disputant to examine options from a perspective of other parties, he or she must understand the other party's frames and be able to view options from other perspectives. Third-party interveners are often helpful in this regard. In addition, seeking to reframe perceptions of losses as gains can enhance the openness and creativity of parties to a dispute. It's important to recognize that frames play a significant role in perpetuating intractable conflicts. As lenses through which disputants interpret conflicts, frames limit the clarity of communication and the quality of information, as well as instigate escalatory processes. These frames, embedded in personal, social, and institutional roles, are often quite stable over time, even through the ebb and flow of many disputes episodes. As such, they contribute to the intractability of the conflict. In addition, frames interact often in ways that tend to reinforce the stability of other frames. Yet, in at least some intractable conflicts, changes in the context of the dispute or purposive interventions designed to alter frames have led to reframing that in turn has increased the tractability of the conflict. Strategies to accomplish this reframing include frame analysis and the construction of forums designed to enhance communication, understanding, and trust.